When my son turned 28, he sat across from me at the oak conference table I'd built this entire company on. He wasn't my boy anymore. He had that same smirk I once had when I thought I'd figured out the world, when arrogance disguised itself as confidence. But there was something else behind his smile, calculation. He thought I didn't see it. He thought he was smarter than me. And that's where he made his first mistake. You see, when you spend 30 years building something from scratch, you don't just create a company. You create an ecosystem of power, of control, of loyalty and fear and quiet respect that doesn't show up in the spreadsheets. I built my empire like a fortress. Every clause, every contract, every handshake, it all had a layer beneath it. And I made sure no one could ever take it from me. Not the government, not a competitor, not even blood. Especially not blood. But my son, he thought he could. He thought he understood me. He'd grown up watching me make deals, destroy rivals, and turn losses into dominance. He assumed he inherited that instinct. What he didn't know was that instincts alone can't replace scars, and mine were carved deep. It started small. He began taking over meetings I didn't attend. He'd charm the younger executives, play the part of the visionary, and sprinkle my name around like seasoning. He thought flattery would buy him credibility. Then he started whispering ideas to the board, suggesting modernization, succession, and strategic restructuring. Big words for mutiny. I let him. Every move I let him make. Every signature, every initiative, every speech where he hinted that the company needed new leadership energy. I said nothing. Silence is the most powerful trap ever built. You let them think they're free, and they'll hang themselves with the rope you handed them. One evening my lawyer called. "Sir, your son's filing an executive motion. He's invoking the transfer clause from the founder's retirement provision." I smiled. Let him. You see, he thought he'd found the loophole, the one I had put there 30 years ago. But that clause wasn't a key, it was a test. I had written it myself, hidden deep in the legal labyrinth of the founding charter. It stated that in the event of my voluntary retirement, ownership could be transferred to the next of kin, only if the founder had signed the clause of succession with intent and in sound mind. That phrase, intent and sound mind, wasn't just words. It meant that no transfer could happen without a notarized letter, sealed and time-stamped by a legal entity I had personally designated. And that entity was a trust with its own clause, the clause of reversal. That clause meant that if the successor ever attempted to assume control by manipulation, coercion, or deceit, the trust would automatically activate full asset recall, transferring all ownership back to me, liquidating their shares at par value, and permanently banning them from future executive positions. It wasn't just a safety net, it was an executioner's blade dressed as fine print. But I didn't tell him that. I watched him march straight into it. When he made his move, it was a show. He called a board meeting while I was on vacation. My chair sat empty. He stood at the head of the table, my table, wearing the same charcoal suit I used to wear when I closed multi-million-dollar deals. He announced that he'd be stepping in as interim CEO while I transitioned to retirement. He spoke about legacy, about, quote, continuing my vision. The board applauded. They always do when they smell power. But they didn't realize they were clapping for a ghost. Within 24 hours, he filed all the necessary paperwork. The signatures were forged to look clean. The documents were rushed through private channels. He thought I'd be shocked when I came back. He thought I'd rage, yell, threaten. But when he called to inform me, I congratulated him. "You've finally grown up," I said. He believed me. That's when I knew he was finished. 3 days later, I called a press conference. Calm. Controlled. I announced that my son would indeed be taking over. The media loved it. A new generation of leadership. They called it. Investors rallied. The stock spiked. My son felt unstoppable. He even started giving interviews, calling the transition the dawn of a new era. That's the beauty of ego. It blinds faster than any drug. Meanwhile, I made one call. Just one. To the trustee. A quiet old man who'd worked in the background since the day I founded the company. "Activate it," I said. That was all. No drama, no threats, just a sentence. The moment he received my word, the clause went live. Every share, every contract, every executive agreement tied to my son's fraudulent claim reversed like clockwork. Within 12 hours, his authority was gone. The bank froze his access. The board revoked his privileges. The public record updated. Legally, he had never been the CEO. The next morning, he stormed into my house. His face was pale, papers in hand, his voice trembling. "You set me up," he yelled. "I didn't even look up for my coffee." "No," I said. "I prepared you. You failed the test." He slammed the papers down. "You ruined me." "No," I replied. "You ruined your chance. You forgot that trust is earned, not inherited. And this company was never yours to steal. It was yours to learn from." He sat there in silence, shaking, his arrogance evaporating into panic. For the first time in years, he looked like my son again. Scared, lost, human. I told him something I had learned the hard way. A man who tries to take power before he's ready loses the respect that gives it meaning. He left that day, but the silence that followed wasn't victory, it was disappointment. I had hoped he'd see through the illusion before it came to this. I had built the clause not just as protection, but as a mirror. I wanted to see if he'd notice that everything in power, contracts, loyalty, legacy, is a reflection of character. And character can't be faked. But months later, I found out he hadn't given up. He started building his own company. He used the contacts he had gained during his brief reign to pitch investors, and at first, I let him. Maybe, I thought, failure had humbled him. Maybe he'd finally understand what it takes to build, not just take. But soon enough, I learned he was using my suppliers, my trade secrets, even my old clients. The betrayal wasn't over, it had just evolved. That's when I realized I had to show him one final lesson, not through contracts, not through lawyers, through consequence. Because sometimes, the only way to teach a man the weight of his actions is to let him carry it. And so, I waited again. Quietly, watching his empire rise on shaky foundations, built with pieces stolen from mine. I didn't intervene. I didn't sue. I didn't call the press. I let the wind blow long enough for him to mistake it for stability. And when he did, I made my move. It wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. It was surgical, calculated, the same way he once tried to outsmart me. But this time, I wasn't protecting a company. I was protecting a principle. The principle that legacy isn't inherited, it's earned through blood, loss, and restraint. And he was about to learn that the hard way. It started with a whisper, not a war. I didn't strike him head on. That would have been too obvious, too merciful. Instead, I began quietly reclaiming what he thought he owned. The suppliers he'd stolen? I called them personally, one by one. No lawyers, no threats, just a reminder. You and I go back 20 years. I told them, you know who kept your business alive, through recessions, through shortages. You know whose handshake built your fortune. Loyalty, real loyalty, doesn't need ink. It remembers the debts that contracts forget. Within weeks, half his supply chain went dark. Orders delayed, materials misplaced, shipments suddenly stuck at customs. He blamed logistics. He blamed incompetence. He didn't realize he was fighting a ghost, one that had written the rulebook before he ever learned to read it. Then I called the banks, the same institutions that once backed my expansions, my buyouts, my mergers. They owed me favors, the kind that aren't written down. I simply reminded them of certain old arrangements, small clauses, buried in years-old agreements. They reviewed his credit lines, his guarantees, his loan conditions. 2 days later, his cash flow froze. Not fully, just enough to make him sweat. The investors began to whisper. They smelled instability, and fear spreads faster than fire in the corporate world. But I didn't stop there. I reached out to the clients he'd poached, people I'd known for decades. I told them, he's young, he's ambitious, let him make his mistakes, but when you're ready for reliability again, my doors are open. I never spoke ill of him, not once. That's important. You never attack directly. You plant doubt, and let their own mind destroy the illusion. Within a month, 2 of his biggest clients terminated contracts, citing uncertainty. By the second month, 3 more followed. He still didn't see my hand in it. He thought it was the market. Bad luck, inexperience. But he was bleeding, and I hadn't even drawn the knife yet. Then came the clause, the real one, the one he never even knew existed. When I built my company, I made sure every executive contract, every vendor agreement, every external partnership had a parent clause that tied it to a master agreement, the founding charter. And that charter had a self-preservation clause. It stated that if any competing entity used proprietary systems derived from or identical to the original company's models, the company could invoke a recall provision, claiming infringement not on the product, but on the structure itself. That meant the very DNA of his business, his supply chain, his pricing framework, his internal software, all technically belonged to me. So I activated it. It started as a simple legal notice. No headlines, no press release, just a sealed letter delivered to his office. Within hours, his lawyers were scrambling, reading, rereading, realizing the nightmare hidden in the paperwork. His company wasn't his. It was a derivative of mine, built with my systems, my infrastructure, my data. And by the law of the clause, I could reclaim or dismantle it entirely. He tried to fight it, of course, filed injunctions, appealed to the courts, called me every name under the sun. But the beauty of foresight is that it's bulletproof. I'd built this system long before he was even born. Every loophole he tried to exploit was one I had already sealed. Every argument he made was already countered in the margins of contracts I'd written decades ago. He wasn't fighting me, he was fighting my ghost. Weeks passed. His investors pulled out, his lawyers backed down, his employees resigned in waves, whispering that he was done. And through it all, I never once gloated. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about revelation. I wanted him to see, really see, the cost of arrogance. To understand that when you build something on deceit, you're not stealing success, you're borrowing it on credit you'll never repay. The final blow came quietly. One morning he came to my house again. No suit this time, no fire in his eyes, just exhaustion. He looked older. The fight had drained him. He didn't ask to come in. He just stood at the doorway, holding the notice of liquidation in his hand. He said one sentence, "Why didn't you stop me earlier?" I looked at him and said, "Because you wouldn't have learned anything if I did." He stepped inside, sat at the same table where this all began, the one I'd built with my own hands. For a moment, the tension melted. He wasn't a rival. He was just my son, broken but human. I told him something I'd never said before. "Do you know why I let you fail? Because every empire built on inheritance dies in comfort. I wanted you to know what it means to lose something you thought was yours. That's how you respect creation." He nodded slowly, tears he didn't hide anymore. "I wanted to be like you," he said quietly. "You built everything. You had control." I shook my head. "No, you wanted to own what I had, not be who I am. There's a difference." We sat in silence for a long time. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the clock I'd bought the year he was born. I told him there was still a way back, not to the company, but to purpose. "Start over," I said. "Build something that's yours this time. And build it slow. Not to win, not to prove me wrong, but to understand the patience it takes to make something last." He left without a word, but I could see something different in his eyes. Not anger, not pride, Maybe pain, but pain with meaning, the kind that forges rather than breaks. Months later, I heard he'd opened a small firm, nothing grand, a consultancy, helping startups avoid the mistakes he once made. He never used my name again, never referenced our past, just worked quietly, consistently. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt toward him in a long time: respect. Sometimes, the hardest part of being a father isn't protecting your child. It's knowing when to let them face the fire you spent your whole life shielding them from. Because without it, they never learn the difference between power and purpose. And in the end, purpose is the only thing worth passing down. But there's one last thing he still doesn't know, something that will reveal itself one day when I'm gone. I left him something, a second clause, hidden in the company's succession documents. It activates only when he's earned back his place, when the trustees verify he's built a company of his own that has lasted 10 years without scandal or fraud. If he does, the trust will quietly transfer full ownership of everything back to him: the company, the shares, the legacy. Not as inheritance, but as redemption. And when that happens, he'll finally understand what I've been trying to teach him all along: that building power means nothing until you've learned how to lose it. Years passed. The world changed. Technology, markets, even the way people did business, it all evolved faster than I ever imagined. But I stayed the same. I came into the office less, preferred to work from home, and watched as the noise of ambition faded into the distance. My company had become something greater than me, a living organism, self-sustaining, feeding thousands of families. It was no longer about control, it was about stewardship. And in that quiet, I started to wonder if my son had learned what he needed to. I'd hear whispers from old contacts, rumors about a firm making waves, run by a man who was calm, precise, and ruthlessly fair. The kind of man who didn't chase clients but attracted them. A man who didn't boast, didn't post, didn't try to look powerful, he just was. And every time someone mentioned his name, I'd feel something unexplainable, an ache of pride mixed with regret. It was him. My son. The same boy who once thought he could steal what I built, now building something of his own, piece by piece, brick by brick, the right way. He'd never reached out. Not once. And I didn't either. That was our silent agreement. A father and son, both too proud to bridge the distance, both too aware that growth needs solitude. But one afternoon my lawyer called me again, same man who had called me years ago about my son's betrayal. "Sir," he said, his voice calm, almost reverent. "It's time. The clause. The redemption clause I'd buried deep, years ago, waiting like a seed in the soil of patience. He's met every condition," the lawyer continued. 10 years, no scandal, no fraud. The trust has verified it all. I didn't speak for a long while. My heart felt heavy, not from sorrow but from the weight of completion. I'd built empires, conquered markets, outsmarted rivals. But this moment, felt like the only real victory. We arranged a meeting, not in a boardroom, not in my house, but at the first cafe where I used to take him as a boy. It was small, quiet, the kind of place nobody important goes anymore. I arrived early, ordered his favorite, black coffee, 2 sugars, and waited. When he walked in, he wasn't the boy who once stormed into my home with fury in his eyes. He was calm, confident, but humble. His posture wasn't built on pride, it was built on peace. He sat down across from me, smiled softly, and said, "You look older." I chuckled. "You look like me." There was a long silence between us, but not an uncomfortable one. Just understanding. 2 men who had lived through the same fire, from opposite sides of the flame. I told him, "I've been watching your work. You've built something solid." He nodded. "I had a good teacher," he said quietly, "even if I didn't realize it at the time." Then I reached into my coat pocket and placed a small, sealed envelope on the table. His eyes flicked to it, confused. "What's that?" "Open it," I said. He hesitated, then tore it open. Inside was a single piece of paper, an official letter from the trustees. He read it once, then again, slower this time. I saw his throat tighten, his breath catch. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "This means it's all mine?" he asked softly. I nodded. "It always was. You just had to become the man who deserved it." He leaned back, silent for a long time, staring at the paper like it was something holy. Then he said, "I thought you hated me." "I never hated you," I said. "I hated what arrogance does to a man. You just happened to wear it the day you thought you could take my crown." He smiled sadly. "And now?" "Now," I said, "you've earned your own." For a moment, he looked like he didn't know what to say. Then he folded the paper carefully, placed it in his jacket, and said, "I don't want it, not yet." That surprised me. "Why not?" He looked me straight in the eyes. "Because I'm not done learning. I don't want what you built until I've built something that can stand next to it." That answer hit me harder than any betrayal ever could. Because that was the moment I realized I hadn't just built a company, I'd built a man. One who understood that true power doesn't come from possession. It comes from patience. We talked for hours that day. About business, about mistakes, about how loneliness feels different when you finally understand it's the price of leadership. He told me how he'd failed over and over in his first few years, how he'd wanted to call me 100 times but couldn't bring himself to. I told him I'd wanted to call too, but I was afraid that if I did, I'd take away his chance to grow. It's strange how much a man can love someone and still stay silent just to protect the lesson. When we finally stood to leave, he said something I'll never forget. "You know, I used to think you were cruel, that you enjoyed watching me fall." "And now?" I asked. He smiled. "Now I know you were just letting gravity teach me what pride never could." He left first. I stayed a little while longer, staring at the empty cup across from me. It hit me then he didn't need me anymore. And somehow, that was the greatest peace I'd ever felt. A year later, he did take over, quietly. No press, no announcement, just a simple transfer of authority. He became the new head of the company, and I stepped aside completely. Watching from a distance, I saw how he led, not with fear, but with precision. Not with ego, but with empathy. The people loved him more than they ever loved me. And for once, that didn't bother me. It made me proud. Sometimes I'd visit the office, just to see how things were running. He'd always stop what he was doing, greet me, make sure I had a seat. One day I noticed he'd changed the sign outside the headquarters. Beneath the company's name, in small engraved letters, it said, "Built on legacy, strengthened by lessons." That's when I knew. The circle was complete. The boy who once tried to steal my kingdom had become the man who could protect it better than I ever did. And maybe that's the secret. Every parent who builds something great eventually learns. You can spend your life trying to make your children strong by giving them everything. Or you can make them invincible by letting them lose it all first. Years later, when my body began to slow and the empire no longer needed my voice echoing through its halls, I found myself waking up at dawn not to go to war, but simply to watch the sunrise. The same sun that used to rise behind the factory walls when I first started this company, one man, one desk, and a single phone. I used to think peace was what you earned after victory. But I was wrong. Peace is what's left when you no longer need to win. One morning I got a call. It was from my son. "Dad," he said, "I need you to come in today." His voice carried a tone I hadn't heard in decades. Not the arrogance of youth or the confidence of success, but that quiet gravity a man gets when he's about to make a choice that will change everything. When I walked into the building, everyone stood. Not out of fear, not out of obligation, but out of respect. The kind you can't buy. The kind I'd spent my entire life chasing, and he'd somehow earned effortlessly. He led me through the glass hallways to the boardroom. The same one where he once tried to dethrone me. Only this time it wasn't a battlefield. It felt sacred. On the table lay a single folder. My name was embossed in gold on the cover. He slid it toward me. "It's the transfer document," he said. "You're officially listed as founder emeritus." I smiled. "I told you, I don't need titles anymore." He nodded. "It's not for you. It's for them. The people who still need to know where this all began." He paused for a moment, then said, "I wanted to show you something." He opened his laptop and played a short video, clips of the company's history, from the first dusty workshop to the skyscraper it had become. My voice echoed faintly from old recordings, my face younger, sharper, harder. Then, it faded to black, and his voice filled the screen. He said, "This company was built by a man who taught me that power means nothing without wisdom, and that wisdom means nothing if it dies with you. This isn't my company or his. It's our legacy, one born from conflict, but sustained by understanding." When it ended, I couldn't say a word. I'd spent my whole life mastering control, and yet in that moment, I couldn't control the one thing I never allowed myself to show: emotion. I looked at him, and he didn't look away. He just said quietly, "I wanted you to know I finally understand." We walked out together to the balcony overlooking the city. The air was sharp, clean. The skyline stretched endlessly, filled with towers that didn't exist when I started. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Everything that happened between us?" I thought for a long time before answering. "Regret?" I said. "No. But I do wish I had told you sooner that I wasn't trying to protect the company from you. I was protecting you from becoming me too soon." He smiled faintly. "Maybe we both had to become each other to understand." We stood there for a while, not saying anything. Just two generations, side by side, breathing in everything we'd built, together and apart. Before I left that day, I turned to him and said, "There's one last thing I want you to add to that charter." "What's that?" he asked. "A new clause. Not about control. About balance." He raised an eyebrow. "Balance?" "Yes," I said. "Every empire needs one rule that protects it from its own success. Add a clause that says leadership must never be inherited, only earned. Let no one sit in this chair out of blood, only out of merit." He nodded slowly. "The cycle ends with me." I smiled. "No, the cycle begins with you." Years went by after that. I visited less and less, until one day I didn't go at all. My mind started to fade the way old machines do, still functional, but slower, softer, uncertain. Yet even in the haze, I'd hear his name whispered, in news reports, in interviews, in award ceremonies, and every time I'd feel that same quiet pride. He'd built something stronger than I ever could, a legacy rooted not in fear, but in discipline and humility. The last time I saw him, it wasn't in the office, it was at home. He'd come to see me, gray at the temples now, wearing that same look of calm strength that had once belonged to me. He sat beside my bed, and I said, "You've done well." He smiled. "You gave me the tools." I shook my head. "I gave you the walls. You built the foundation." He took my hand, and I saw it clearly. The man he'd become, the man I'd always hoped he'd be. Not a replica of me, but the completion of me, the version I never had the patience to grow into. And as I drifted between wakefulness and sleep, I thought back to the clause that started it all, the one I'd written to protect my empire. I realized it hadn't just saved my company, it had saved my son. Because sometimes the traps we build to protect power become the very lessons that teach love. When I was gone, they said he added one more line beneath the company's founding statement. Not about profits, not about growth. Just 6 simple words that said everything we never could. Built by conflict. Sustained by forgiveness. Continued by choice.